And our last talk of the day, a little bit longer than lightning talk, will be the wrap-up from the NANOG 67 Hackathon by Dave Swafford. And we may be able to take one or two brief questions, but we do have beer and gear to get to.
Thank you. So I'm going to be talking today just for a little bit about the hackathon we had this past weekend. Just to kind of walk you through first a little bit about what a hackathon is, and then to just give you a little bit of a deep dive into what we were working on and some of the projects that came out of this. So first, what is a hackathon? Well, one simple way is to look at it as an event where a lot of people just meet to engage in collaborative programming to solve new and interesting problems. Sometimes with beer and alcohol, because it's, sometimes we make it like a party-like atmosphere to add some of the fun to it. So what does it mean to hack? To hack has a few different definitions here. One is to modify a computer program in a skillful or clever way. Another is to write computer programs for enjoyment. And finally, the one that's pretty cool though, very close to me, is to make something short in a short period of time, often by taking shortcuts. Now the last one is kind of interesting to note because it's the idea of taking an idea and skipping the entire design and discussion and argument phase with your coworkers and just building it, trying to make it work just to see if it can work. And then once you have something that works, go prove that it could potentially be worthwhile to management or your teammates. So types of hacks. There's a wide range here. It doesn't have to be software. There are some examples here of software. For example, automating emails that might have come out of yesterday's event of, hey, will you peer with me? But we could also look at hardware hacks such as the console servers with Raspberry Pis. And finally, even documentation, such as writing a great wiki for your favorite open source project or something else that you're working with. So as I start talking this might sound familiar to your day job or day jobs of people you work with. So why do we classify this event as anything special or different? It's not just a party, even though some might think that is. But what is really the differentiator here is that in your day job, you have a lot of other stuff. You've got email to deal with, tickets, maybe customers. You have change requests. You hopefully get to write code if that's part of your job, but even if that is your main responsibility, that may not be what you have time for on most days. So a hackathon is a great way to set the stage of having a mental escape, to go work on that project that's been in the back of your mind for months. This problem that you just keep working around and band-aiding, that you just know if you had 8 or 20 hours, which is a really long hackathon, but say 8 or 10 hours, to just focus on getting a prototype out. It's a really cool way to just do that. And also, one note there is if you are participating in a hackathon, make sure your managers know and make sure that they're aware and supportive of it. Because being able to actually block off time on your own schedule to really go do this and not really be on call is something that will make it so much more successful for you. So let's take a look now at Sunday's hackathon. It was actually pretty big. We had about 50 people. A very wide range of people were in attendance, from network and system engineers to academics and students, even managers, and I believe a few directors. They were from a wide range of companies, big companies that everybody had heard of to little companies no one had heard of. But that didn't matter because we were all participating equally in groups together. And we even had people with coding background and without. There were a couple of really cool projects or actually a bunch of cool projects that came out of this. So just talking a little bit about what we were working on this Saturday, we had one project called Am I Blocked, for example, which is talking about remote triggered black hole detection to see if you are currently being blocked out in the wilderness. We had another one called PyCon, which you saw Brandon talk about, which is console servers using Raspberry Pis. We also had Takeoff, which we saw yesterday as well, that Peter and I believe it was Brian talked about, which is pre-flight testing for your network devices. Trying to combine all those manual audits that you normally run off a mop or a checklist and say, hey, go run this CLI tool, make sure the device is ready. We also had 2x2, a desktop messaging client, NIC-Info, which was an RDAP client to aggregate a bunch of different data sources such as Whois and Aaron, for example, and NetDB, a topology database to build an off-box source of truth. So looking at this, we actually spent the whole day. The hackathon ranged from 9:30 in the morning to 7 p.m., which is a long period of time to just stay focused working on something. What was pretty cool about this is we didn't really plan a ton in advance, but we did a little bit through an email list that all the attendees were on. But it really was more organized that day, impromptu. And we had all these different groups, and we just organized tables to kind of encourage group sitting. There was tables of 6, and about 10 of those set up. And so we started out the pitch, or the morning, with just some logistics and some welcoming, and then we're like, hey, if you have an idea, come up here and pitch it. And we made everybody become a salesperson for a bit to try to recruit people to help them with their idea. Which is cool, because if you have an idea that you really want to work on and make known in the world, it gave everybody an opportunity to advertise the idea. But then they got to recruit random strangers to help them. And who wouldn't want random people to help you write code when you want to write a ton of code? So that actually worked really well, because then we broke into musical chairs, and all the groups were completely random, but they actually worked really well together. Looking at this from a higher level view, though, it was kind of interesting to see how this worked out. So we didn't prescribe what each group was working on, and we did not even define who was in what group. They just chose where they wanted to sit, and if they ran out of chairs, they grabbed more chairs. So some groups took a divide and conquer approach, which Brandon's group, for example, with the Raspberry Pis did, where they broke out a very large problem. So for example, looking at what he worked on in his group, they were building console servers based on Raspberry Pis, where each little Raspberry Pi had one serial interface or two via USB interfaces, and each Raspberry Pi represented a remote console server. And then there was a little, I think Intel NUC, for example, a little mini microserver that was like the phone home registration system. And so all of these different console servers phoned home to this little server to create one giant virtual console server, so that when you wanted to connect to them, instead of connecting to each individual Raspberry Pi, you would actually log in through the main one. It actually was pretty in-depth, because it had a UI, a backend, I believe maybe even a database or some integration at that. So they broke it out where one person or one group did just the UI. Another section of the group did just the backend. And they worked independently for a while, and then agreed on some interface to talk to each other, such as a JSON format. And then as they got to different milestones, they started bringing them together. Other groups took totally different approaches. The group I was in actually took this approach called pair programming, which is where we basically worked together on the same project, but we just simply shared a screen throughout the day. So for example, we had a shared virtual private server that each of the groups was given. And so in my group, we all logged into the virtual private server, and then we loaded up a GNU screen, and then we just started sharing one interactive terminal. And it was kind of funny, because at first, I wasn't even planning to suggest that at first, because I'm kind of scared personally of pair programming, because I've done it a few times, and it's a challenge to get started with. But one of the guys suggested, hey, let's just share a screen session, because we were working on a problem that was kind of in-depth and kind of abstract anyway. And so what we did is the first person to actually suggest an idea, we just made that person go. And so it was totally random who started. And then we set a timer for about 15 to 20 minutes. And so each person took turns rotating the group of driving the keyboard and also partially driving the design. And then we talked out loud as we did it. So even though we weren't entirely sure what we were building, we built it together on the fly, but it was really, really neat. You kind of just had to be there to try it. That actually worked really well too, because there was like 6 of us for a while, and so we just kind of fed off each other. Other groups actually, I don't know if this took place on this hackathon, but in past hackathons, we commonly see the parallel competition model too, which is where the better mousetrap wins. You have a group, they work on an idea, but sometimes you can only have 1 or 2 people who are really working on it, so you just do it in your own way and then try to see which way ends up being better. The idea of code wins arguments, for example. And then just a note, if you hadn't seen pair programming, I actually grabbed a definition off Wikipedia here. The way we've tried it at Facebook in my own team, it's typically just 2 people where we sit in a conference room together and share a screen. But if you haven't tried this before, it's really interesting and a really good way to challenge yourself, because it's really difficult in that it's not hard, but it's really weird if you're used to being solo and programming. Like someone myself, for example, I'm always used to writing code on my own and then describing it as I'm done. Whereas when you program with two people in the same room, you automatically become a much dumber person, because as you try to talk out loud, you're like, I don't know what I'm doing here. And it's really hard, but it makes you think and forces you to think deeper about how to describe something when you're describing it to your peer, for example. So definitely try that if you haven't, because it worked really well in my group, for example. And so finally, the hackathon kind of ended with this really cool prototype forum. We had everybody come up on the stage at the end and say, hey, here's what I worked on. Here's my next steps. I have a GitHub repository. Some people already built a website, and we're hosting it live right now. And it was a really cool way to close off the day and show give everybody some recognition for what they worked on too. So just some closing thoughts here, though, if you're trying to replicate this outside of here. One thing that I think worked really well for us is that we tried to keep it really informal, in that we didn't want to prescribe what people were working on. We had an idea of a theme thrown out there, but it was more of an idea to get people started to think about some problem if they weren't quite sure of something. But it does have to be organized. So we had an email address ahead of time that we started talking to people with. And we kept some organization going. But we kept it loose and informal, though, which was pretty cool. One other thing, though, I think that worked really nice is the idea that Brandon brought up, which is the whole pitch your hack thing and try to recruit people. We actually don't do that at Facebook's own hackathons. Instead, we have such big hackathons that people post in a group or so and try to just recruit people days in advance. And usually just following posts on groups is kind of hard to get people engaged, whereas this one, you actually had the whole floor to sell people on. And finally, the only rule of a hackathon is that you must hack. So if you come to the hackathon, try something, try and hack with a group, hack on your own, but just have fun. Thank you. Cool. So we do have a little bit extra time, so I am going to open it up to questions.
I don't have a question. My name's Chris O'Connell. I'm with WoW Cable, and I run a dev team doing software automation for the network. And I just wanted to add that pair programming is an integral part to our process. I have developers all over the country. And so what we do is we use a service called cloud9.io. C9.io is the web URL. And it's actually free. And when you sign up an account, they actually spin up a container, like a Docker container, with an interpreter like PHP, Google, Golang, or Python, whatever it is you want to use. And you actually just use your web browser, and you have a tab where you have your CLI or your console with all the GNU utilities, and you can see what each other are doing. And then at the top, you actually have your rich text editor for your code, so you can see what the other guy is typing in the top. Meanwhile, you can be in the bottom tab actually testing out the code on the command line, and you can share tabs and see what other people are doing. And you also have the entire file structure with all the files that you're working on. And then when you're done working on the prototype hacking, you actually just export the code and drop it in your source control. So it's free, they charge nothing for it, and it's based on a web browser. That's all you need. You don't need to have any of the development tools installed. So just figured I'd share that with you guys, cloud9.io.
That's really cool. Yeah, because one of the problems we ran into when we first tried it was, how do we share? And we originally, myself and Ari, another guy on the team, we originally tried it just hovering over laptops. And after a while, that's really uncomfortable. So that's a really cool idea.
Yeah, people want their space. They want to use their computers. And everybody gets to use their own computer, and it's free. It's a Docker container. They give you 1 gig of RAM and 1 CPU and a couple of gig of space for each container, and you can't beat it, really.
Yeah.
So.
Neat.
And also, we do have some of the information online. Some of the slides from the demonstrations of the hacks have links to their code. We do have a GitHub repository off the hackathon part of the NANOG 67 webpage, and a wiki. It's not all complete, but there is some information there about the hacks.
Thank you. Oh wait, was there another question? Sorry. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Brian Knight from NITEL. As a participant of the hackathon, so you mentioned in there that people could choose what hack they wanted to work on. I think that was particularly valuable. it seems like a lot of the participants, they're starting to carry forward these projects. I know my team, we are still talking about, and we're still excited about the PyCon project. So I think that was one of the keys to the success.
That's awesome.
And we also gave the teams a chance to ask for help. So partway through the day, what are your challenges? Is there any specific help you need? And so somebody needed JavaScript help. Another team came over and helped them, and we had a few other exchanges.
Yeah, and it was really good having the wide range of people there, too. Well, cool. Well, I don't want to keep you waiting too much for beer and gear, so enjoy. Thank you.
All right, and the beer and gear is starting at 6 o'clock, so very shortly, up on the second floor at the International Ballroom. So thank you for our sponsors, and we look forward to having you back here tomorrow morning early for more general session talks.